Welcome to the Guild's lecture series. We're going to cover in this lecture drugs and occultism. This is always something that most people are interested in, and most occultists being alternative people and looking for enlightenment paths or mind-opening paths tend to have interest in and have used some sort of drugs. And drugs is a terrible word. We go into the really proper occult way of using, quote, drugs in the Foundation's 5 trance states, I should say. And talk about of how to use it 100% correctly and all the things it takes and the different types of so-called drugs to use them in a more occult scientist way and not just a party way. But everything is a drug, and there's a great misunderstanding what drugs are. The most addictive substance on the face of this planet. It will shock a lot of people, but it's nicotine, followed closely by crack cocaine. So nicotine is more addictive, and this so-called legal drug is nothing but poison and does absolutely nothing for anybody. It doesn't clarify you. The minor stimulation you get from nicotine is very negative to the occult process. So it's a horrible, horrible, and stupid practice to become in. Anybody who's involved in that should stop smoking immediately regular cigarettes, and it's just garbage, and it has absolutely no value whatsoever. Generally, smoking any tobaccos, if you're inhaling them, is bad if that's what it's for. And that means pipes are terrible because you get this hot in your throat, in your mouth. Cigars are okay to an extent, but generally if you smoke them down and it gets too hot in your mouth, you're doing a lot of damage. And smoking in general is bad, and it gives you no particular benefits. There are no highs or stimulants you get from it that are of value. It's simply an addiction. It's something to do with your hands, and that's why most people smoke cigarettes. It's just something to do. Well, find something else to do. Plain and simple. I mean, tobacco itself, pure tobacco, which is in cigars and pipes, it does have a nice fragrance and even a nice taste when not lit. I enjoy a Cuban cigar just unlit, and just kind of breathing through the tobacco gives you a nice flavor and smell. But the minute you light it, you lose all those aromas are vaporized, and you don't get anything from it. But they're all bad habits. They all cost a lot of money, and you should be putting your money elsewhere. And of course, as I said, everything's a drug. I mean, most people's drugs of choice is religion and food. People are using food for all sorts of reasons and attitudes. And the price they're paying for that, with the entire world getting fatter and fatter, because it's generally it's inexpensive. It gives you immediate gratification. It keeps your hands busy again. And so, it's an easy, fun thing to do, which has terrible consequences, because you're not sitting down and eating steaks. You're sitting down and eating a bunch of junk foods that are full of sugars and salts and other things, which your brain really loves to get and have lots of. But your body will reject it. And generally, these things are full of bad chemicals. And of course, you have the worst drug of all, which is religion, which is nothing more than Satanism. Nothing more than the left-hand path, programming your brain into destruction and control, putting you in a little box of hatred, no matter what that is. And that goes for all religions. And obviously the three big ones, but neither do the other ones escape Buddhism, all those other things. I've never known a Buddhist who was very intelligent either. And, well, their philosophies are okay. It's still a religion, and it still closes a box around you. And a lot of their advanced practices and their non-sexuality and all these other things they add in there don't add up. So religion is religion, whether it's Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist, Taoist, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, whatever. It's all part of the path of evil and the dark side, and you need to stay away from those. But it is a fantastic drug because you're better than everybody else. You get in a gang and you can think of how evil everybody else is, and then you can see ways of destroying them and how superior you are to them because you know the secret. It's just a joke. So people are so whacked out on this, it's unbelievable. And it just goes on and on and on. People are addicted horribly to just about everything. Video games are addictive. Horribly addictive as video games. The internet, these social networks that people are on 24/7 babbling nonsensical stuff. And this is all part of the Black Lodge plan to keep you busy doing nothing. Your little 3-sentence statements on political issues or how pictures of your kids and dogs are a big waste of time. And while they have a place within your immediate family, nobody else really cares, and they don't do anything for society. So all of these things are addictive trash things. And of course, people are addicted to sex and porno and all that stuff because that's very addictive as well. It's very much like food. You're getting immediate gratification. It's stimulating brain centers of pleasure like food does, and even religion does, because you're kicking off these very powerful drugs in your mind. And all these things generally have their place in moderation, and life, unfortunately, is about moderation. There's times to be excessive, and there's nothing wrong with being excessive for short periods of time. When this excessiveness is every single day, that's called an addiction and a problem. And that can be absolutely anything. Exercise addicts. People say, well, exercise is good for you. Yeah, well, there's people that run all the time for hours and hours because they're getting this high in their head. They're kicking off all these very strong chemicals. So it goes on and on and on of what is addictive and not. The human species and the human mind is so complicated and so searching for interesting things to think about and do that it constantly wants to alter its state of common, boring nonsense, the everyday reality we live in and the everyday reality we need to do to function at a job, to do all the boring things, to go shopping, to whatever. No matter what you do, this is part of what your brain is zoned out on. Your brain doesn't want to stay there. It wants to go somewhere else. Generally, the joy centers want to be activated all the time. And that's because of the state of boring or the state of actually plain and simple pain and stress that you're constantly put under to do a whole bunch of tasks that is required to survive, but really, unfortunately, serves no other purpose than surviving. And the human consciousness really hates that. They want to go on to higher levels of whatever it is. Sports, another thing. People watch sports all the time. There's people that watch sports every day, 4 or 5 hours the minute they get home. They go to sports bars all weekend. This is all an addiction. This is not just a hobby. Anything that becomes excessive is not a hobby or an activity. It's an addiction. So everything in moderation. There's nothing wrong with watching sports. There's nothing wrong with eating. There's nothing wrong with indulging in sex. All that is certainly perfectly fine and should be done, but not when it's everything involved in it. And when you become a cult scientist, of course, going beyond just partying, and of course everybody's so stressed out, everybody wants to feel better and get rid of the stress and kick in some joy energies, so they tend to take different, I like to call them substances because that's what they are. Coffee's a drug too. It's full of caffeine. Most people are drinking, a lot of people I should say, not most, but a lot of people drink pots of that a day and are constantly drinking coffee, which is really bad for your health. But coffee is not bad for you. Coffee is good for you in small amounts. So all of these things generally are good for you. When we talk about drugs that are bad for you, you're usually talking about synthetic and processed drugs. Opiates, even pure opiates used in a very controlled manner, are not bad for you. They're natural plants. When they're refined into heroin and other things, and they become very destructive and very addictive. Same thing with pretty much any prescription drugs are too potent, and because they're too potent and they work in a very strong manner, they become very addictive, and these addictions generally don't help you. You need really to go in and out of states of consciousness, not stay doped all the time. And you can't stay doped all the time, you can't stay drunk all the time, you can't stay high all the time. Your body cannot tolerate it. You can't function that way, and then again, it's an addiction and you're abusing it. You need to go in and out depending on what you're doing. There are times when you're stressed out or want to feel better where there's nothing wrong with using some substance. Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, it's recommended. It relieves stress. It puts you back in a positive mental state instead of being depressed. It's good for you. All of it's been shown through all the studies that alcohol and all the other drugs, particularly that what I call natural substances like alcohol, which is just made from basically plant-based products or natural-based products, or marijuana is basically just a plant. It's an herb. As they say, it's a weed, are perfectly fine, have been proven over thousands of years of use to not only not be destructive, but actually health benefiting. The benefits of marijuana health-wise for all sorts of different medical conditions, as well as just in general for many conditions that that society produces, is without a question there. And it's certainly a mild and substance to be used, and certainly nothing wrong with it. Alcohol is the same way. All those people that really live long are all generally have alcohol in their diet. And again, this isn't drinking bottles of anything. It's all about using it to take this. Stress kills you more than anything else. And if you use a substance to reduce stress, what's going to happen? You're going to live longer. So if you get wasted and you puke and fall down and cause problems and have social things and can't function without certain drugs, then you're getting into the addiction problem, and that's just an escape. But everybody has escapes, whether it's sex or video games or watching a sports or drinking endless amounts of beer. It goes on and on and on with the fact of is what all this nonsense is. But from an occult point of view, it's a necessity to get into a trance state. Everything is achieved in occultism from being in a trance state. And you have to break your contact with the boring, obnoxious world that you're in, the day-to-day nonsense that enslaves you and presses you down and keeps you thinking about the materialistic, nonsense, addictive world that they want you to be in. And that's why pornography is everywhere. It's designed to be everywhere. That was all part of the Black Lodge plan to keep you in line, along with video games and so many other things. You're so busy doing nonsense, you're not really doing any higher spiritual or valuable activities. So that's the reason it's there, is that it entrances people in negativity. But getting into a trance state or an altered state of consciousness is the key to all higher magical achievement. It is not emotion, as some ignorant people are now pushing on the market today with their imbecilic books. It's not about getting all emotional. While emotion works as one aspect of some rituals, it is not part of that. You have to connect to the streams of power. You don't do that in an enraged state. That's a moron's point of view. It only has a very limited use, and there's no spiritual traditions that tell you to get in an enraged or highly emotional state to achieve anything. It's absolutely the opposite. That closes down your psychic centers. So it's ignoramus procedures. So you want to get into a trance state, and trance states are created in many different ways. As I said, we go into this, it's the use of scent, light, sound, substances, food, all of these things combined to create trance states. And this is very critical, as I said. Nothing happens from your normal state of consciousness. You don't go from work into doing magical rituals and be able to perform them properly. You have to get rid of that old understanding and that consciousness state you're in to function the normal, screwed up, common, boring world. And you must get into your inner magical being. That's where everything happens from. And it would be great to live like monks, and and you can go from this mental state into another mental state. And of course, that's ultimately your goal, and that's part of what the core foundations are all about. And again, we deal with those, the core abilities. We deal with those in the foundations series as well. What the core abilities are, what you want to work on. But every single magical tradition, every single culture on this planet uses some sort of, quote, substances. Um, as I said, drugs have a very negative term. People think of drugs, you're thinking of these crack cocaine and all these other nasty, and now they're coming up with all sorts of drugs that are just made from poisons, basically. So these are not these are artificial, created, toxic, horrible substances that fuck with your mind and don't do anything to put you in trance states that are usable. While natural substances have been used since the beginning of time. The Egyptians were the first to make beer. Alcohol and all these things has been made by every single culture because it's so easy to make alcohol. And obviously the cultures that had the availability of herbals like marijuana and other things have used those as well. In the coca plant where cocaine is made from. But see, cocaine is, again, it's a synthesized drug that is highly doctored and formulated. It's not the natural plant. Now, the people in those regions chew the leaves, and it gives them a little buzz. It helps them keep going. It's almost like coffee. So the point is there's nothing wrong with that. Again, you're using a natural substance in its natural manner in a natural way. When you synthesize it and start making it into this much more potent and stronger mixture by doing all sorts of processing, you've changed this completely from its original form. So it's the difference between white sugar, which is highly processed, chewing sugar cane, or actually using honey, which are natural. Sugar cane and honey are both naturally sweet products, which have actually, honey has amazing different benefits and is a superfood, while white sugar is nothing but junk and has no value, and ultimately is very bad for your body. So there's a big difference there. And there's a big difference between abusive use, use in a recreational way, which I'm not even sure it's even recreational. I consider it medicinal. If you come home from work and you're all stressed out and you're all messed up and your body's working at low levels and you're generating toxic energies within you, so you have a little something. That is therapeutic. And even as a part of social partying, what is wrong with any of that stuff? There's no difference in anything else. As I said, you can abuse anything. You can be running for 5 hours a day too. Is that normal? Is there something better about that because it doesn't involve? No, you're basically stupider. You can get the same high using a natural substance. But you have to alter your consciousness from the state it is in now. And the easiest way to do that, and there's a whole process to it. It's complicated to do it in a real occult science manner. And you really need instruction on that. That's why we recommend Trance States Foundation 5. Very critical to get that and know how to do it. But that's not for this lecture. This lecture is designed to give an overview. The overview is that you need to do that, and to alter your consciousness, one of the quickest and easiest ways is to use some sort of natural substance. And that's tricky because you got to make sure you don't get too high, you don't get too wasted, because then you go from the trance state of leaving the horrible, normal, common state that you're in into a drunken, sleepy, and unfunctional state. Now, if you do that, if you get too high or too drunk, you've lost the magical properties of it. You need enough to release all those blockages in you, the mind that's keeping you in the foul commonness, the mind that tells you that there is no other realities other than this garbage one. You need to move into that magical being, and alcohol is generally called, some people call it depressants or other things. That's not really true. Alcohol is an uninhibitor. So it changes your reality and consciousness into a state where you're much more receptive. And like everything, if you don't use these, because you will not get anywhere. And this is basically is the easy way. It's nice to build up later where you're this monkish type perfect person where you can go into altered states. But most monks from all traditions are using drugs. Don't let that fool you, including the Tibetans and everything else. Everybody's using drugs because it's fun, interesting, and fast. And meditation and going to altered states, you have to control your mind, and that's critical for any occult scientist. You have to control your consciousness and control your mind. That's done through a whole bunch of meditative and visualization processes. This you need and must have. It's part of your core abilities. But part of achieving these states is also being able to go into an altered state easily and effectively by using natural substances. It is no problem. What you have to figure out is there's basically 3 categories of natural substances, and that's your alcohol, your marijuanas, and your hallucinogens. Now, a lot of people like to go vision questing, and there's the whole shamanic tradition that is based on using peyote and several other type LSD, the very popular drug from South America now. But these generally, when they're done with shamans and shamanic attitudes, are done in a very particular spiritual fashion by people that know what they're doing and can do it properly and in the right vein, where it doesn't end up into just some sort of mental masturbation party where you're just zoned out. A lot of people claim these are helpful, and of course it does break your reality. It actually creates another reality, which is my problem with it, is that I'm not sure how much is gained from these practices. You're creating a reality. Are you really going into a particular plant knowledge-based condition, or are you creating something out of your own mind, your own perceptions, and fitting in with your own reality? And that's not what trance stating is all about. It's about going into a magical reality and not just creating a fantasy world. The books of Terence McKenna and other ones heavily go into these hallucinogens, and some people can gain wisdom from these. I would say these are last on your list, and if you're going to experiment with these, you need to really do it in a place. Like in South America, they have places where you go to and they make the preparation of the proper herbs, and there are people there that know what's going on, know how to do it, etc. So I wouldn't recommend using any of these other things. I don't think LSD seems to be something that brings you to an enlightened state or opens up things per se. But, it is certainly a mind screw that really forces you into seeing things differently. And a lot of people may need that rude awakening. As an occult scientist, I like to have control over my trance states and like to be able to channel that energy more directly into the goals I'm looking to achieve, which is basically empowering MF fields, manifesting fields that is going to create something in my life. So when you get into these hallucinogens, you're kind of letting whatever entities or spirits or whatever is coming from your consciousness take control of you, and you're like watching TV. And it's very difficult to be interactive with it. But it's a complicated subject that you have to look into carefully. But just going out and getting LSD and using it is something I don't recommend. You need to really know what's going on, read a lot of literature on it, and if you're into that, you need to really go to places where you can do that in a proper manner with professionals that use it with hundreds of people and know what they're doing. And also there's an illegal factor to it. Pretty much, alcohol is legal everywhere in the world. Marijuana will be legal pretty much in most places of the world in the next 10 to 15 years, and is legal in most states of the United States right now, at least medical marijuana. So it's easily obtained, and of course, anybody can get medical marijuana because of the fact that marijuana is good for everything. So if you have stress, you qualify for medical marijuana. And if you're going to do this, obviously, obey your laws as much as you possibly can, because not because law is important, because man-made law, a lot of it is just complete nonsense, but because you don't want to get into further trouble. If you're holding this stuff, transporting it in states that don't allow it, you can get into serious trouble and end up in prison forever. I mean, while there's this one aspect of nobody cares, there are states that enforce this. There are people that had a couple of marijuana plant seeds that are in prison for life in places like the Satanic Texas. And that's another state that, of course, murders people, including retarded people, constantly. So you got to be very careful where you're at and what you're doing. So many states allow medical marijuana that if you're really into that, you should move to those states anywhere. It's almost half now. Legal conditions are the entire country of the United States should legalize marijuana within the next 5 years, or at least almost every state. Once people see what happens with the billions of dollars that can be made from this, all of a sudden, public opinion and the corporations will get behind campaigns to make sure that it's legal everywhere, because they're going to want some of that billions of dollars. It's also hurting the cigarette companies. It will hurt the alcohol companies. All this as people convert over to these other things, and they're going to want their piece of the pie. And all of a sudden, everybody's going to come out just like the goofball president of the United States just came out and said, well, it's no worse than alcohol. Well, like everybody hasn't known this. The people that benefit from illegal anything is the organized crime that runs the world and owns the president. As this slowly changes, while the organized crime will take over the back door, many people will be offering these, will be getting into this billion-dollar, and I would say trillion-dollar business that's out there. It's actually foolish that all the countries in the world don't do this. It's a great way to raise revenue, and something that is not a problem like anything else. You're going to have one substance legal like alcohol that causes all sorts of problems because of misuse. Then there's no argument you can't do it with marijuana. Are there going to be? Of course, there's going to be abuses. Are there going to be? Of course, there is. Point is, these people are smoking it now anyway. The abuse is there already, and if you have lots of money, or you can require people to go into, like with alcohol, you'll have people going into AA for marijuana, and all these other. That's just the way everything goes. People die from taking too much aspirin a year. That is no reason that the massive amount of people that want something like alcohol can't use it. And everything in this world is about conduct. There's nothing wrong with having any of these things legal, but it's conduct. You're not going to be driving cars. You're not going to be doing things that jeopardize your life and others. And that could be for anything. People are on prescription drugs. This happens all the time. People who do it with alcohol. So it goes on and on and on with all the, it's all about conduct. So, most things should be allowed. Prostitution is another ridiculous thing to keep illegal. But it's done that way because there's billions of dollars in it, and organized crime makes sure it's done that way because they benefit from it. The minute you take the profit out of it, the minute you tax it and legalize it and can control it, it means things get cleaner and better. You can control disease, you can get your tax revenues, everything comes from that, and that's the way things should be done. It should be based on conduct. And that goes with everything, plain and simple. People have problems with different types of sexuality. Well, it really doesn't matter what your sexuality is. Whether you're heterosexual or homosexual, you should not be forcing that or pushing that on other people with sexual harassment, etc. Plain and simple. So it really doesn't matter. It's about how you conduct yourself. This also gets into guns and everything else. With the millions and millions of guns there are in the United States, there's basically very low amount of crime that's there. And very few people use it for really what they should be using them for, which is resisting the Black Lodge. But the bottom line is that it's all about conduct. If you use something improperly, then you get into trouble. Just like with alcohol, it'll throw you in jail. If you get arrested too many times for driving under the influence, or you hurt somebody or kill somebody, I mean, this is not, oh, it's okay, you're on drugs. You're going to be penalized even more. So, I mean, it's just as simple as that. But getting back to the magical use is that, it has to be done in a very particular fashion. As I said, if you get too high and then you fall asleep, or you're wasted, you can't really figure out what you're doing. And as I said, that's why I have problems with the hallucinogens, because you really never know what you're doing in most states. Maybe some people can control this, whatever, but as I said, that's very difficult to do. Well, it's not difficult to do with alcohol and marijuana. So and as I said, you want to use things that are legal in your particular area. So marijuana is legal in a lot of places, and you can use it without a problem, and that's important. Alcohol, is nothing wrong with alcohol. There's nothing wrong with strong alcohols. Again, it's how you use it. And if you use something and it makes you weird or violent, then you don't want to use it. Plain and simple. And that goes with anything. How many people get in accidents because they've eaten too big of a meals and they're sleepy and fall asleep behind the wheel? So we should then outlaw big meals. You're only allowed to have 2 ounces of food every time you sit down. So this is what I mean about conduct. So alcohol has its place and does have healing benefits unto itself. Everybody's heard about wine. It's good for your heart. Alcohol in general is good for you in limited quantities. And if it achieves for you what you're looking for, helps you get into these altered states, that's well and good. But there's another thing. You have to be careful what you do and to the amount. If you drink too much, you get sick or fall asleep, that's not a sacred ritual. It's not part of the occult science of what you're trying to do, if you're using it in that fashion. So you have to be very careful. You have to combine it with foods. One of the good things about marijuana is that they're now making it in many food preparations, which allow for an extended altered state. It keeps you at a higher level longer than just the rush you get. And that's the big problem with using any type of substances. You want to avoid the rush. You want it to build and sustain. So that means generally you have to be very careful how much you take in, and you have to generally combine that with food. It's very critical to combine that with food. Drinking or smoking on an empty stomach is a real problem. And while you may get higher faster, you're also going to crash. So you have to figure out how to avoid that, because the whole idea is to get to an altered state, stay there to be able to do what you have to do, and then enjoy that state and wallow in that state of your inner magical being activated, and that is how you do it based in occult science. But it's, the reality is that if you're not doing these practices, you generally will achieve nothing. I don't know anybody who doesn't drink or smoke or do anything else that is either interesting, intelligent, or could ever do anything. They're all lying, deceiving little babies that are basically wimps and weirdos that think that living some sort of bizarre monkish lifestyle is some sort of high consciousness, when the monks and all these people are always using substances. It doesn't even equate. It's a mommy thing, and these people are all mommy little weasels, and usually their mates tell them what to do, or they're just weasels, and they're boring people. They have no sexuality. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So there's just no end to the problems of people that stay in the controlled, boring existence of the evil world, the evil physical world that controls them. If you don't break your connection to that world, you will be caught into their evilness and programmed to be that low-level being that you are if you don't do these things. So I never would associate with anybody who doesn't drink or smoke, and particularly in social situations, because all they're doing is sitting there like a lump of poo, spouting out their little lies or their programmed information from mommy. So it's really a serious problem with these people, and it's even more people that claim they want to be occultists, because you're not going to be able to go into controlled consciousness states without that. The people that don't use these kind of substances are the stupidest occultists you will ever meet, on top of what I just said about them. Not only are they boring, non-sexual freaks, they are stupid. They can't get into altered states. They don't understand it. They're into occultism because they're freaks and they're accepted to some degree, and they want to experience something as long as it's safe and mommy lets me. But they'll never be able to get that. And that's the reality of all of that. So you really need to use something to assist the whole process. It's really stupid to spend hours and hours doing things, but these people don't read, they can't meditate, they can't concentrate. Maybe if they got themselves a little altered in consciousness, they would be able to try and meditate and do things a little better, and it certainly would help them. And that is to a certain level, of course. Again, it's all about if you go too far or you're just getting high and pass out, that doesn't help you either think in an altered state or do things in an altered state. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing that either at the particular times. The idea of getting to a state of consciousness where you are sleepy and relax and let go of tension is perfectly fine. Obviously, it's like everything else, that would be a practice for a particular time, not when you're doing other things. And obviously, you don't want to get high and be doing anything. The biggest problem with everybody is driving. And this is something that you don't want to be doing in these states. And eventually, they're going to have roadblocks everywhere where they test everybody. So it won't even be on your actions. They'll just test you and haul you off. So it's extremely dangerous, and people need to work those things out if they're in groups or anything else where people can get home and can function without driving. That's really critical. But everybody does it because you're almost forced to in some social situations. But it's very dangerous if you're doing it. So if you're doing this in a magical practice, you're doing this at your home. You're doing it in your sacred environment you created next to your altar. And you're doing many other things that influence and get you into higher states. You're using particular types of lights, particular types of music and sound. You're using scent. All of these are part of the process of doing it correctly to get into these altered states, but a sophisticated, a higher altered state, not just a party state when you're doing magic. So that's really critical, and there's ways of doing this, and you have to find out what works best for you, and how much of everything you have to take. It's a complicated process that you really have to figure out, and when you're doing it, you have to be careful so you don't go past these levels and cause problems. And everybody has a different susceptibility. Some people can drink a lot of alcohol and not have problems. Some people can only drink beer. Some people who drink the general wives' tale that seems to be very popular now is that anything that's a dark colored alcohol or liquor tends to make people act crazy, which seems to be true, which is your whiskeys, your scotches, your rums. Well, those are all the really strong alcohols too, so I'm not sure they have the highest alcohol content. But people tend to say that makes them crazy. And of course, there's some people that get violent on it. Well, obviously, if that's the case, then you're not using something to help an altered state. What you're doing is creating a madness state, and that is insanity, and it certainly isn't something you would do. That seems to rarely happen with marijuana, which is one of the positive aspects of marijuana, is that generally marijuana puts you in a state of thinking, and the only side effect to any great degree with most people is you get hungry. I've never seen a person violent on marijuana. I'm sure it happens. There are lots of cultures that get high before they go into combat because obviously it eliminates fear. So it's not like it's impossible to use marijuana and then be physical. That's a different type of physical. You're not really in a rage. You're in a lack of fear situation, and that allows you to function differently. And there's many types of marijuana. All the marijuana that's being produced now is very high grade, very potent. So you have to be careful what works and what doesn't work for you personally. And you have to try the different types and figure out what works. And how this stuff kicks in. If you use marijuana in a food, it generally takes time for that to get into your body and get you to a certain level, which means, again, it has to be used in a particular fashion. Expect to do a ritual and just eat a candy bar, it ain't going to work that way. It's going to take it depends on the person again, but it's going to take hours to get into your system. And then it's going to keep you in a sustained level of that for a while. Unlike other drugs, which tend to work quicker and are out of your system quicker. So all of this you have to figure out yourself. You have to figure out what works into your life and what does. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. There's no danger in going on to stronger drugs or being anything else. It's just ridiculous. All of these things are ridiculous. They're all just told to keep you enslaved. And you know, as marijuana becomes universally used, which is what the establishment Black Lodge fears, is that people will start to wake up a little, and they won't put up with so much stuff, and they won't want to work for slave wages and do other things. And you know, if you can subsist in a poor environment because you have something that boosts your consciousness, why do a slave labor job? This is what they fear, and of course this will be a certain factor of it, which will be very positive in the long run. So all in all, that's part of the process of everything, but you have to adapt it to your life. Everything's about using it in a proper fashion, particularly even if you're partying with it, you don't want to get yourself wasted and sick. That's stupid. But when you're using it in a sacred manner of using it for magical rituals, etc., you need to have a lot of control of it. And while these substances break down that wall and help you reach to different streams of power and consciousness and helps you contact your inner magical being, it's only the first step. There are other things that entrance the mind and open you up that have to be included as well. So it's just not one use of substances. You have to use sound, you have to use lights, you have to combine the food and scent, meaning incense and so forth. All this creates a strong magical environment, and this is what's laid out in the trance actual training booklet. So with that, I think it gives you a good idea of what magic and drugs is all about. And as I said, I encourage you getting that trance booklet and exploring it in the proper, disciplined manner, the way you should. So thanks for listening, and believe nothing and question everything.